Hi, and thanks for joining us today for our discussion about how our communities can begin to leverage opportunity zones in Pennsylvania. My name is Scott Dietrich. I'm a project manager with the Governor's Action Team in the Department of Community and Economic Development, and I'm joined by Evan Weiss, a director for PEL Analytics. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about opportunity zones today and provide a brief overview of what the program is and how we can begin to take advantage of it. An opportunity zone, before we get too far into the weeds, in this case, is a qualified opportunity zone. This is not Pennsylvania's Keystone Opportunity Zone program. It is a completely separate incentive created by the federal government as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And as we move forward, we'll begin to look at where these zones are located throughout the Commonwealth. It's also important to know that the states that have these qualified opportunity zones do not have the ability to change or alter the boundaries as they currently exist. That being said, what is an opportunity zone? In the simplest form, it is a federal capital gains tax incentive offered to taxpayers who decide to make investments in businesses or real estate in one of the 8,762 distressed census tracts that were designated throughout the country as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, if that investment is made with a capital gain and held for 5, 7, or at least 10 years.
So why did we create opportunity zones in the first place? So we were really trying to address a series of pretty familiar problems, but with a relatively new kind of tool. And so the basic problems we had was just over the past 50 or so years, there was an enormous departure of wealth, residents, jobs, business, and industry from cities and rural areas across America, really oriented towards both suburbanization of housing and suburbanization of things like businesses, business parks, warehousing, and factories. So what we saw over time was just a huge change, not only in the location of business, but where capital was being raised to fund business and to fund real estate. Much of the capital used to come from the community itself. So if you had a community in central Pennsylvania building a new factory, it was probably money from central Pennsylvania that was helping to build the factory. Today, almost 80% of venture investment comes from New York City, the Bay Area, and Boston. So both the concentration of capital and the concentration of projects has really shifted enormously, over the course of the past 50 years. And what this does is just creates a vicious cycle where we're seeing disinvestment and we're seeing a lack of investors. And so over time, the problems tend to get worse and they tend to become more concentrated. So the tools that we're trying to use here are basically something that reorients the market itself and the way investors think about making investments rather than another government program or another hyper-targeted government incentive. This is meant to be a very free way to incentivize businesses, to incentivize individual investors, and even just regular people to change how they think about making investments by giving this pretty lucrative tax incentive for investments. So there's estimated to be $6 trillion of capital available for the program. That's all the capital that's been sitting in bank accounts and stocks and real estate and not having been realized. That means sold. And at the same time, it's meant to be extremely simple, where you can invest in pretty much any type of business, any type of real estate, and you can do so in a large and scalable way without having to learn the ins and outs of a very complicated program. And so we're looking to, the Treasury Secretary estimates there's going to be $100 billion in capital deployed in this program every year, and we're beginning to see it speed up. And again, the only thing you have to keep in mind really is that the investment is meant to go into an opportunity zone, and we'll get to what those are in a second. So as Scott mentioned earlier, the federal government is the one that created this program. So this program was created as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. It was a bipartisan bill sponsored by Senator Booker and Senator Scott, Senator Booker of New Jersey and Senator Scott of South Carolina. What it did is we created the baseline rules of the incentive. It put the governing structure of the incentive into the IRS, and it stated that all of the tax benefits are at the federal level. What the states did was they had the opportunity to designate up to 25% of all their census tracts as opportunity zones and 25% of their eligible census tracts, meaning low-income communities. So each state did this differently, and Pennsylvania did it in a pretty unique way, and Scott will talk about that.
Yeah, so after being notified that we were able to select 25% of our eligible census tracts, Governor Wolf and the Department of Community and Economic Development kind of led the charge for the designation process. And the main strategy for selecting our zones was to reach out and solicit comments from all of the eligible census tracts prior to making our designation. We received comments from approximately 730 of nearly 1,200 eligible census tracts from a variety of groups, elected officials, communities, economic development partners, among others. And we focused our zones on a couple criteria, basically the ability to eliminate poverty, if there was any pre-existing business activity ongoing already within the zone, and certainly some geographic diversity. We wanted to spread these zones out across all corners of the Commonwealth so we could have or spur some investment into both metropolitan and rural communities. As I mentioned, we had approximately 1,200 eligible tracts from which we were able to recommend 300 to the IRS, which ultimately certified those zones in 2018. For comparison's sake, Delaware has 25 zones, Maryland with 149, Ohio has 320, New Jersey 169, and New York with 514. Next, we're going to just walk you through a map that we've created that is on our webpage at dced.pa.gov/QOZ. It's an interactive map that allows you the opportunity to click on any of the 300 designated opportunity zones in Pennsylvania. We'll move through here and we'll show you kind of a closer look at the regions where these zones are located.
Okay, so what is the benefit itself? So really, the program is divided into three. So the first benefit and the second benefit apply to giving you a tax advantage to what you're investing. So what that means is that this whole process starts with deferring a capital gain. So if you sell a stock, a piece of real estate, and it can be anything, it could be for $1 capital gain or it could be for $1 million. There's no floor, there's no cap. So when you sell something and you realize a capital gain, you have 180 days to invest it in an opportunity fund. Once it's invested into the opportunity fund, you then begin a clock which allows you to basically defer or not pay your capital gain tax liability that you would have owed until December 31st of 2026. So that's the first benefit. It's a deferral of your capital gains. You don't have to pay, but you don't have to pay it until December 31st, 2026, or if you decide to sell your stake in the opportunity fund sooner, then that comes due at that time. The second benefit is a reduction on your capital gains tax liability that you would have owed. So if you owed, basically what you would have owed gets reduced by 10% if you hold your investment in the opportunity fund for 5 years, so a 10% reduction. If you hold it for 7 years, you get an additional 5% for a total of 15% as your total reduction. And again, these first two benefits apply to what you would have owed. So the third benefit, and this is probably the one that has the most people talking about the program, is when you invest in the opportunity fund, you invested in something. So let's say you were able to invest in a new building for $500,000 through the opportunity fund, and you held that investment for 10 years. After 10 years, that building is now worth $1 million. And so in that time, you have a $500,000 capital gain. So if you wait 10 years, and that's the key mark, so from the date you invested and 10 years later is when you can sell it and realize this third benefit, all of that capital gain is tax-free. So that new $500,000 you created by making your opportunity fund investment is now entirely tax-free. And so one of the key questions, which we'll return to, which we don't know yet, but we expect to be the case, is that right now you have to invest in an opportunity fund and keep that investment in the opportunity fund for that whole amount of time. So when you invested in something, you invested in a building in Carlisle. Right now, the law states that you have to leave it invested basically in that building in Carlisle and not sell it in year 5 and then make a reinvestment into a building in Harrisburg, within that 10-year period. We expect that to be the case, but right now we don't know. So the law is meant to be very general and forgiving in the sense that it doesn't tell you where you have to invest other than the opportunity zones. It doesn't tell you what you have to invest in. It also doesn't have very many, if really any kind of programmatic requirements, i.e. the number of jobs you have to create or the number of affordable housing units you have to build. There's an enormous amount of leeway to try to allow for the most creativity other than some technical exemptions. So the main technical issues that you have to think about are really related to timing. We have here really the 3 main things you have to think about when making an opportunity fund investment. And so the first one is that the property has to be acquired after December 31st of 2017. And why we're concerned about that is that's essentially the date that the tax law came into effect in the first place. So if you already held property prior to that date, it unfortunately doesn't qualify for the opportunity fund investment. So all the property that is eligible for investment, whether it's business property or real estate, it has to have been acquired after December 31st, 2017. So a good rule of thumb is just sometime in 2018 is when this had to have been acquired, and of course going forward. And you can still acquire property and receive these benefits basically up until December 31st, 2026. But you will obviously, as the time passes, you'll lose some of that benefit. You won't be able to meet the 5 and 7 year mark. And so the first benchmark we have for that is this year, actually, December 31st, 2019 is the last time you can make an investment and receive the full benefit of the Opportunity Zone program. So the second thing is that the original use of the property has to commence with the Opportunity Fund. And so what that means is 2 things. It basically means that we need to think about new construction or, and this is what the third bullet is about, substantial rehabilitation. And so what that means is that we can't have property, basically you just buy it and then do nothing with it and get a tax benefit that way. The IRS was really been careful to not allow this to be just a pure tax sheltering strategy. So what it does allow you to do is either build new, or if you buy something that already exists and you rehab it and you do a lot of rehab, which basically means you double the basis in the property, or you double the value, that would then qualify. So again, you build a new building, or let's say you buy an old row home and then you're able to turn it into an entirely new piece of housing, that would apply, or you buy a warehouse and then convert it into lofts, that would apply. So the other key piece, and really this is important for business investment, is that 70% of all of the assets that are invested in have to be in the opportunity zone itself. And so what that's trying to avoid is just having people, buy some real estate in Malibu and then lump it into an opportunity fund and really are looking for the tax benefit off of the real estate in Malibu instead of just the opportunity fund. We did want to have some leeway here because if you have any more than 30% of your business and your property might be located in different places, we don't want to have you be disqualified. So 70% property in the opportunity zone, 30% out was really the thing that we were trying to stick at. So the last thing is the sin businesses are not eligible for investments. So that includes golf courses, country clubs, massage parlors, hot tub facilities, and suntan facilities, as well as gambling. And I think also not on here, but notably any cannabis related or marijuana industry at this time, it was not permitted for investment.
So I think it's important to kind of touch on what we're seeing so far with regard to investment and deal flow through the Opportunity Zone program. So I think it's important to note before we move forward that we are still waiting on some additional guidance from the federal government and the IRS as part of this program. So there is some uncertainty surrounding some of the investments, but at this point, there's enough information for investors and developers to comfortably do most real estate projects. And in fact, many deals are being done as of now through this incentive. There are a few dozen large multi-asset funds that have been set up. However, most tend to be single investor to a single project. These types of deals seem to be cleaner, easier to track and monitor from a administrative standpoint. And that's the main structure that we're seeing with these deals at this point. Most of the opportunity zone capital that is flowing right now tends to come from individual or small groups of investors, not a large, massive investment group, as it's just tough to attract and manage those funds at that level with that many stakeholders involved. The early activity in the program has been concentrated in the markets where investment was expected to flow naturally. I think some of that has to do with some of the uncertainty around it and maybe how it can benefit some of our smaller and mid-sized communities. Another thing about the program is the ease of applying other federal tax incentives like low-income housing tax credits, new markets, historic tax credits lends itself very nicely to the program. And projects of all sizes are happening. And as Evan mentioned, there is no minimum or maximum threshold for investment. With that being said, there are a couple key remaining questions. How will the funds be able to realistically invest in operating businesses? There's some clarification that's needed from the federal government on the business investment side. We're also curious as how funds can buy and sell assets. Can they sell one project to invest in another without kind of restarting their investment clock? That's some clarification that needs to come out as well. Other requirements or questions are how are we going to be tracking investments? How are these funds going to be disclosing or documenting the investment that's taking place? How will existing businesses and property owners be able to benefit? Who can invest in them? Where do they find the capital to help grow their business or to help improve their property? The idea of leases and how they're going to be treated. There's some uncertainty with that structure. And then how will multi-asset funds be organized? And I think the ultimate question is actually what will the impact truly be?
So I worked on a paper with Bruce Katz, and it was released out of Drexel University in Philadelphia as part of the Nowak Metro Finance Lab, which was named in tribute to Jeremy Nowak, who many of you will know from the Reinvestment Fund. But we tried to underscore and really give communities some ammunition and arrows in the quiver to make this program real for them. So you can go see the paper and then obviously contact DCED about learning how we are going to actually make some of these real. And then we're also going to have additional webinars that cover some of these questions. But the first one is to design and market an investment prospectus, which is basically just an introduction to your community, both in terms of the basic demographic and economic figures, your major employers, your sectors of employment, and other kinds of statistics, and then some actual projects that you want to tell investors about. The second is maximizing the economic impact of anchor institutions. So that's really getting everyone from your hospitals to your colleges, universities, and also anchor corporations or businesses or even families involved with the program. The third is to maximize the economic impact of publicly owned assets. And so that means making sure that your city basically knows what public land is where, that the infrastructure is in good working order, and that things like houses and homes that a housing authority or the city might have or the county have possession of might be good for packaging for the use of an opportunity fund. The fourth is to accelerate employment density and smart placemaking. So I think the most incredible thing about Pennsylvania and with the opportunity funds is every one of these communities has an identity, and that identity is worth talking about and worth marketing. And so really making that and what you're so special about your community a centerpiece of this is really a way to differentiate between the 8,762 of these around America. The fifth is to ensure opportunity zone infrastructure is of high quality. This is a case where the public sector can really get involved on every level of government, from the Commonwealth to the counties and to the municipalities. It's much easier to make investments if the sewer connections are there, the roads are good, and that the spur rail is operating. The sixth is to align city investment decisions with the opportunity zones. So this is everything from where you might have alerta, where there's existing, Commonwealth incentives like the QOZ and the KIZ, and then also just simply where the city has put some of its own money. Did a new DPW headquarters go up, a new affordable housing investment get made? Capital follows capital, and that's really worth keeping in mind. The seventh is to support local entrepreneurs. So much of this, I think, has been framed as there's going to be money falling from the sky from Wall Street and from Silicon Valley, but in reality, a lot of it's going to be very locally based. And if you can walk away with one message from this, it's trying to get everyone locally in your community engaged. And so that's supporting the businesses in the community, whether that's a real estate business, a great developer who's done some transformative projects, or someone with a financial technology business and an incubator. Those are all the kind of things we want to pay attention to. The eighth is to help local residents obtain skills. And so what we mean there is that we really want people to use this as an incentive to employ all different kinds of people and help them learn skills. And so whether that's skills in the construction industry, the building trades, or the highest possible biotechnology and financial applications, all of that has a home in the Opportunity Zone program, and just trying to align the existing workforce development assets with your Opportunity Zone investments is going to be something that's going to be attractive to investors. So the third is really to support the production and preservation of affordable housing. And so a lot of the fear of Opportunity Zones, particularly in some of the larger cities, is that this is just going to speed up processes of gentrification. So really a key is to try to make sure that the housing continues to exist for the people who are in the Opportunity Zone in the first place, and that they share in the wealth creation that this program is supplementing. So that means trying to complement with all the different community development corporations that exist in Pennsylvania, the redevelopment authorities, and understanding how we can make that work. So the 10th is through institution building. And so some of these are public institutions, like making sure that your redevelopment authority, that your city, that your community development corporation are all really strong entities and ready to do this. But really more than that, it's just trying to make sure that there is an entity, or at least a way in your city, to get everyone in a room, to try to make this happen. So you have an ability to bring together business, to bring together the education world, the medical world, churches, everything, just in one place where really you can work through some of these problems and challenges together.
All right, thanks, Evan. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us and learn a little bit about the Qualified Opportunity Zone program and how you can leverage the incentive here in Pennsylvania. I want to thank Evan for taking the time to also provide his insight into the program. For more information on the Qualified Opportunity Zones, including an interactive map, you can go to dced.pa.gov/QOZ. You also be able to find some frequently asked questions and background information on how Pennsylvania arrived at the designation of its 300 zones. Please keep an eye out for next webinar that will cover the concept of the investment prospectus. Thank you.